In modern society, we perceive witches as old ladies with long disfigured noses, warts on their faces, a tall triangular hat, witchcraft and spells, and of course the iconic flying on a broomstick in the night sky. Shakespeare's conception of witches is perhaps a slight representation of how we see witches today, and is what could have possibly formed our opinions of witches in our modern world. In Macbeth, the witches, also known as the Weird Sisters by the other characters in Macbeth, play a crucial role at the introductory point of the play, as the witches set the scene by introducing the prophecy, in which we will explore further later in the video. Another thing you should know is that the witches have their own language in which they speak. Every single character in Macbeth speak in iambic pentameter, except for the witches whose language is called trochaic tetrameter, which is short and fast-paced rhythm, almost resembling a chant. The difference in the character's language gives the witches a unique vibe when they speak, projecting many different emotions and feelings such as suspense, fear, and mysteriousness. The first appearance of the witches dives straight into Act 1, Scene 1, where the three witches are discussing the destination in which the three sisters would meet again. This is evident when the first witch says, "Where shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or rain?" What the first witch is doing is establishing that these three witches have a close bond with one another, and they're planning to meet up again. Shakespeare is also hinting the three witches are up to something in which the audience do not yet know about, which adds suspense and curiosity into the mix. The witches then discuss when they will meet Macbeth. By doing this, they are showing that they can predict how they will meet Macbeth and later telling him about the prophecy. Again, this is evident when the third witch says, "There to meet Macbeth." This is an obvious statement in which hints they will meet Macbeth in the near future, and later speaking about the prophecy in which I mentioned before. Again, the language used and spoken by the witches is trochaic tetrameter. The idea Shakespeare is trying to project is the witches' first appearance is that the witches act as key figures to keep the story moving forward. This is also known as a plot device. And finally, at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, on line 13, all three witches chant their most famous saying in Shakespeare's play. This, of course, is "Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air." What the witches are doing is hinting something will happen to Macbeth, though no one knows what it will be. This technique is called a paradox. A paradox is a compilation of two contradictory statements put together. The witches make their second appearance in Act 1, Scene 3. In this scene, the witches talk as they wait for the coming of Macbeth, and when Macbeth arrives, they greet him as a Thane of Cawdor, already hinting to Macbeth the prophecy. This technique is called dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is essentially building up the suspense to the climax. It's when the audience know what's going on or what will happen, whereas the characters in the play or film do not know what's going to happen whatsoever. This keeps the audience at the edge of their seats every time. The second appearance of the witches has a prime focus on many English beliefs at the time. In fact, this time period was called the Jacobean era. The Jacobean era was a time where people believed witches were evil creatures who performed acts of cruelty to people, especially younger children. In this time period, witches were feared amongst most people in society, and were treated very much differently to those who were not witches, even though witches did not actually exist at all. Carrying on from the witches waiting for Macbeth, they also come to the conclusion that Banquo's descendants will be the kings of Heath, Heath referring to the barren land. Anyways, the witches speak to Macbeth about the prophecy. This is evident when each witch refers to Macbeth as alternate names as king, until the final witch says, "All hail King Macbeth, the shout be king hereafter." Macbeth at this point is troubled by the witches' predictions, and as a matter of fact, later further discusses the prophecy with Banquo. The third appearance of the witches comes later in Act 4, Scene 1. In this scene, the witches are making what seems to be a charm as Macbeth arrives, who quickly insists to know where his future lies. The three witches make biased predictions in Macbeth's favour. Macbeth is then presented with a vision in which he sees a row of kings, all coming from Banquo. At the end, the witches vanish into thin air, only to leave Macbeth with a determination to kill Macduff's family as they fled to England. This is where the witches play the role of, again, the plot device, as they alter the plot and keep the play moving forward. Instead of the audience predicting what's going to happen, they are left in utter amusement and wondering what will be happening next. The witches seem to interact with Macbeth for the majority of the time on stage, as because they are telling him about the prophecy of him being the king. The lesson Shakespeare is trying to teach is that perhaps witches weren't who they were perceived as during the Jacobean era. The Jacobean era again thought witches performed horrible acts of cruelty, but in the play of Macbeth, we did not see any cruel acts practiced by the witches. Instead, we saw more of a cheeky side to the witches rather than an evil one. However, I believe Shakespeare intentionally made the witches act the way they are. Since witches are well known for their devious plans and wickedness, witches will continue to remain a mysterious and unpredictable figure once again.